I put my wife through law school while I worked 3 jobs. The day she became a lawyer, she said, "I'm too successful to be with someone like you. I have found someone else." The next morning, she learned what happens when you burn bridges. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I'm some kind of hero, because let's be real. Heroes don't spend 7 years of their prime youth smelling like French fry grease, cardboard dust, and the broken dreams of overnight security guards. But that was my life, and somehow, in the twisted logic that only love can justify, I thought I was doing something noble. 7 years. That's 2 presidential terms, almost a decade. Enough time for people to get entire medical degrees, and what did I get? A collection of back problems that would make a chiropractor weep with joy at the business opportunity, a sleep schedule that could only be described as theoretical, and the unwavering belief that my wife Clarissa was going to make it all worth it when she finally became a lawyer. 3 jobs wasn't a choice, it was a survival strategy wrapped in optimism and duct taped together with caffeine. My morning started at 4:30 when most people were still drooling on their pillows, dreaming about whatever normal people dream about. Probably vacations and retirement funds and other fairy tales I'd forgotten existed. I'd drag myself to the warehouse district where I'd spend 3 hours loading crates that I'm pretty sure violated several laws of physics with how heavy they were. The guys there called me college boy because I was putting my wife through law school. And they thought that was hilarious because apparently supporting your spouse's education is comedy gold when you're surrounded by forklifts and the distinct smell of industrial despair. Then I'd race across town, and by race I mean sit in traffic while eating a gas station breakfast burrito that tasted like regret wrapped in a tortilla to make it to my day job at Freshburger, where I had the absolute privilege of being screamed at by customers who acted like I'd personally insulted their ancestors by putting pickles on their sandwich when they'd asked for no pickles. "Do you even listen?" they'd yell, and I'd think, "Lady, I've been awake since before the sun had its morning coffee." So, no, my listening skills are currently on vacation in a place my body will never visit. But I'd smile, apologize, remake the burger, and wonder if this was what Clarissa meant when she talked about paying your dues. Weekends? Those weren't for rest. Those were for my security gig at a corporate office building downtown, where nothing ever happened except me fighting to keep my eyes open while watching camera feeds of empty hallways. The most exciting part of that job was when the cleaning crew would come through and we'd nod at each other like veterans acknowledging shared trauma. Sometimes I'd doze off and wake up in a panic, convinced I'd missed some major security breach, only to realize the most dangerous thing that happened was Janet from accounting forgetting her badge again. Between all of this, the loading, the flipping, the guarding, and I was supposed to be a husband. I was supposed to come home to our tiny apartment that was generously described as cozy by the landlord and a shoebox with plumbing issues by everyone else, and be present for Clarissa. But here's the thing about working 3 jobs. You stop being a person and start being a ghost who occasionally shows up to pay bills and mumble something supportive before passing out on the couch, still wearing your security uniform. But Clarissa, man, she had this way of making it all seem worth it. She'd talk about her future like it was our future, using we so much that I actually believed it. "When I become a lawyer, we'll finally have stability," she'd say, her eyes bright with ambition and what I thought was love. "We'll buy a real house, Thomas. We'll take vacations. We'll actually live instead of just surviving." And I'd sit there, my back screaming from the day's labor, my eyes burning from exhaustion, and I'd think, "Yeah, we will. This is temporary. This is an investment in us." She was brilliant. I'm not going to take that away from her. The woman could read a legal textbook like it was a thriller novel, memorizing case law and precedents, while I could barely remember which job I was supposed to be at on which day. She'd practice her arguments in our apartment, pacing back and forth in her pajamas, pointing at invisible judges and delivering speeches about justice and constitutional rights with the kind of passion that made me think she was going to change the world. "How is that?" she'd ask, and I'd say, "You're going to destroy them in court." And she'd smile that smile that made me forget about the smell of burger grease that had permanently embedded itself in my skin. My buddy Marcus, God bless him, was the only person who saw through the whole thing. We'd meet up maybe once a month when our schedules aligned, usually at some depressing diner at 2 in the morning when I had a gap between the security shift and the warehouse shift. He'd sit there with his cheap coffee, looking at me like I was a puppy who'd just walked into traffic, And he'd drop truth bombs that I was too in love to properly process. Bro, he'd say, stirring his coffee with the intensity of a man performing surgery, women who say, we'll have stability mean they'll have stability. You'll just have sore knees and a participation trophy. I'd laugh it off because Marcus was cynical like that. The kind of guy who thought romance was a scam invented by greeting card companies and divorce lawyers drumming up future business. Clarissa's not like that, I tell him. She appreciates everything I'm doing. She cried last week when I brought home her favorite Thai food. And Marcus would look at me with this expression that was half pity, half respect for my commitment to delusion. Yeah, man, she cried. Tears are free. Wait until she has to actually choose between you and her new lawyer friends. But I didn't want to hear it. I couldn't hear it. Because if I stopped to actually think about what I was doing, sacrificing my health, my youth, my entire existence, for someone who increasingly looked at me like I was furniture that needed replacing, I might have had to admit that Marcus was on to something. And I wasn't ready for that. I was invested. 7 years invested. That's not something you just walk away from because your friend makes a good point over discount coffee. Clarissa wasn't heartless, at least that's what I told myself. She'd leave me notes sometimes. Thank you for everything, I love you. She'd kiss me goodbye before I left for the warehouse, even though she was usually half asleep and probably kissing my general direction rather than actually me. On her good days, she'd ask about my jobs, pretend to be interested in whatever mundane disaster had occurred at Freshburger, and she'd tell me about her classes, her professors, her dreams of making partner at some prestigious firm. Looking back now, I can see what I couldn't see then. She was already leaving. Not physically, she was still in our apartment, still sleeping in our bed, still eating the groceries I bought with money I'd earned one exhausted hour at a time. But mentally, emotionally, she was already living in a future where I didn't exist, or at least where I existed as a footnote, a thank you, in the acknowledgement section of her success story. I'd like to thank my ex-husband Thomas for funding my education while I figured out I could do better. How could someone with tears like that ever betray me? That's what I asked myself on the hard days, the days when my body physically hurt from the work, when I'd see other couples my age going out for dinner or taking weekend trips or doing literally anything that didn't involve industrial machinery or deep fryers. She cried over takeout. She said she loved me. She talked about we and us and our future. Those things had to mean something, right? Spoiler alert, because I'm telling you this story from the other side of the disaster. They didn't mean what I thought they meant. Tears are easy, words are cheap, and our future somehow has a way of becoming my future the second someone gets a taste of success and realizes they don't need to share the spotlight with the guy who smells like he works 3 jobs because he does. But I didn't know that yet. I was still in the believing phase, still convinced that love and sacrifice were the same thing, still thinking that working myself into the ground was what good husbands did. I was 7 years into a dream that was about to become a nightmare, and I didn't even see it coming. Law school didn't just change Clarissa. It performed a complete personality transplant, like one of those reality TV makeovers. Except instead of getting better hair and a new wardrobe, she got an upgraded ego and a PhD in making me feel like I was something she'd accidentally stepped in on her way to greatness. It started subtle, the way all relationship disasters do, because if someone just woke up one day and announced, I think you're garbage now, you'd have the good sense to leave. But no, it's always a slow burn, a gradual shift from we're in this together to we're in this together, but I'm driving and you're in the trunk. First came the wardrobe change. Clarissa started dressing like she was already billing hours at $300 a pop, strutting around in blazers that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and heels that made this clicking sound on our apartment floor that somehow communicated disappointment in my existence. I need to look professional, she'd explain, when I'd glance at the credit card statement and wonder if we were secretly funding a fashion line I didn't know about. First impressions matter in law, Thomas. You wouldn't understand. And there it was, that phrase that would become her favorite way of dismissing me. You wouldn't understand. She was right. I didn't understand, but not for the reasons she thought. I didn't understand how the woman who used to wear my old t-shirts around the apartment and call it our cozy time suddenly needed designer everything just to feel like herself. I didn't understand how someone could go from packing leftover sandwiches for lunch to only eating at places where the menu didn't list prices because networking happens over meals, Thomas, not packed lunches like we're in middle school. But apparently my confusion was just proof that I was operating on a different intellectual level. Specifically, several levels below her new law school friends, who probably never had to Google, what does pro bono actually mean, like I did. Then came the talking. Oh man, did she start talking differently? Clarissa developed this way of speaking that made every conversation sound like a deposition, throwing around legal terms like she was getting paid by the Latin phrase. That's a non sequitur, Thomas. You're making a false equivalency. That argument lacks standing. I'd ask her what she wanted for dinner, and she'd respond like I'd just questioned her entire thesis on constitutional law. Meanwhile, I'm standing there in my fresh burger uniform, smelling like fries and existential dread, trying to figure out when pizza or Chinese became a debate that required citing precedents. The worst part wasn't even the new vocabulary, it was the speed. She talked faster, like her mouth was trying to keep pace with her racing ambition, barely pausing for breath between sentences about tort reform and appellate procedures and whatever the hell she was learning in her classes. I'd try to follow along, nodding at appropriate moments, throwing in supportive comments like, that's really interesting, or you're going to crush that exam, but honestly, half the time I had no idea what she was saying. I was too busy mentally calculating whether I had time to nap for 45 minutes before my security shift, or if I should just mainline another energy drink and pray my heart didn't give up on me. And the way she started looking at me, that was probably the beginning of the end, though I was too exhausted to properly process it at the time. She'd glance at me the way you'd look at a chair, acknowledging its existence, maybe appreciating its utility, but not really seeing it as anything worth emotional investment. I'd walk into the apartment after a 12-hour combination of warehouse lifting and burger flipping, my body screaming and my brain operating on fumes, and she wouldn't even look up from her casebooks. Hey, I'm home, I'd say, and she'd grunt something that might have been a greeting or might have been annoyance at the interruption. I became background noise in my own marriage, the soundtrack of struggle that played while she studied for her starring role. I'd try to connect with her, really I would, because I'm not a complete idiot despite what my life choices might suggest. Want to grab dinner? I'd ask, thinking maybe we could have one evening that resembled our old life, back when we actually enjoyed each other's company and talked about things that didn't require a law degree to understand. And she'd sigh, this deep, exhausted sigh that made it clear that my suggestion was the most burdensome thing anyone had ever asked of her. I'm busy, Thomas. You don't understand the workload. There was that phrase again. You don't understand. She was right. I didn't understand the workload of law school, but you know what I did understand? The workload of 3 actual jobs. I understood waking up before dawn to load trucks, understood the special kind of exhaustion that comes from standing over a hot grill for 8 hours, understood the mind-numbing boredom of overnight security shifts where your only companion is the eternal question of whether you're going to make it through without falling asleep and getting fired. I understood working so hard that your body forgot what it felt like to not hurt. But apparently, that wasn't the right kind of understanding. That was just manual labor. Simple stuff, nothing compared to the intellectual Everest she was climbing. She stopped saying, I love you. That was the thing that should have been my wake-up call, the giant neon sign flashing, abandon ship, that I completely ignored because I'd invested 7 years, and what's a little emotional neglect when you've already sacrificed your entire 20s? The I love yous that used to punctuate our days just vanished, replaced with I'm exhausted and I need space and can you please just give me quiet to study? Love became something from our past, a relic from a simpler time before she discovered she was destined for greatness, and I was destined to apparently be her historical footnote. I'd lie in bed next to her, on the rare occasions when our schedules aligned enough for us to actually be in bed at the same time, and I could feel the distance even though we were inches apart. She'd be on her laptop, reviewing notes or drafting practice briefs, the blue light from the screen making her face look cold and unfamiliar. I'd try to initiate conversation, maybe touch her shoulder, remind her that I existed as more than just the guy who paid the bills, and she'd flinch like I'd interrupted something sacred. I have a test tomorrow, Thomas. This is important. Everything was important except us. Her classes were important. Her study groups were important. Her networking events were important. Oh God, the networking events. She'd come home from those smelling like wine and ambition, talking about people I'd never meet with, names I'd never remember, lawyers and professors and fellow students who were all apparently brilliant and going places. You should have heard Marcus. Not your Marcus, obviously. Marcus Chen from my civil procedure class. His analysis of the case was just incredible. And I'd think, yeah, my Marcus might not have an incredible analysis of civil procedure, But at least he's not fake impressed by people who use big words to say simple things. Funny how love disappears the moment someone gets Wi-Fi and ambition. One day you're a couple, a team, two people facing the world together, and the next day you're just the IT department and the financial backer for someone else's solo career. Clarissa got a taste of that law school life, the debates, the competition, the promise of prestige, and suddenly everything about our old life looked shabby and small, including me, especially me. I told myself it was temporary, because that's what you do when you're watching something die, but you're not ready to admit it's dead. She's just stressed, I'd explained to Marcus during our increasingly rare coffee meetings. Law school is brutal. She'll come around after graduation. Once she gets a job and things settle down, we'll get back to normal. And Marcus would look at me with that expression that said he knew better, but didn't want to be the one to shatter my delusions completely. Sure, man, after graduation, that's definitely when things will magically fix themselves. But deep down in that place where we store truths we're not ready to face, I knew. I knew that Clarissa wasn't temporarily stressed. She was permanently changed. Or maybe she hadn't changed at all. Maybe I was just finally seeing who she'd always been underneath the sweet words and the grateful tears. Someone who viewed people as stepping stones when someone who could look at 7 years of sacrifice and see nothing but the necessary price of admission to her new life. Maybe she'd always been capable of this coldness, and I'd been too busy working 3 jobs and believing in fairy tales to notice. Spoiler number 2, since I'm already ruining the surprise, she didn't come around after graduation. In fact, graduation was when everything finally, spectacularly fell apart. But I didn't know that yet. I was still holding on to hope like it was a life raft, still thinking that love could survive being ignored and undervalued and treated like an inconvenient obligation. I was still stupid enough to believe that the woman who couldn't even look at me without seeming burdened by my presence would somehow remember why she married me in the first place. And hope's a funny thing. It keeps you going right up until the moment it destroys you. 2 months before Clarissa's graduation, back when I was still operating under the delusion that we had a future that included both of us. I got a phone call that would have made a fantastic movie moment if my life were a movie and not just a series of unfortunate events held together by stubbornness and caffeine. I was at Freshburger, naturally, because where else would life-changing news find me except elbow deep in French fry grease, dealing with a customer who was absolutely convinced that her burger was looking at her funny and demanded a replacement. I almost didn't answer the phone because it was an unknown number. And unknown numbers at 3 in the afternoon usually meant either spam calls about my car's extended warranty or bill collectors wondering why I was late on payments I definitely couldn't afford. But something made me step into the back room, that grimy little space between the freezer and the mop closet that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, and I answered. Hello, I said, expecting a robot voice to tell me I'd won a cruise I'd never take or owed taxes I definitely didn't have money for. Instead, I got a very real, very human voice that belonged to someone who sounded like they charged by the syllable. Mr. Green? Thomas Green? The voice was smooth, professional, the kind of voice that wore expensive suits and had never once in its life smelled like burger grease. This is James Holloway, attorney at Holloway and Associates. I'm calling regarding the estate of Margaret Green. Margaret Green, my Aunt Maggie, the family legend, the eccentric rich aunt who'd made her fortune doing something in real estate that I'd never fully understood, because every time she tried to explain it at family gatherings, she'd get sidetracked telling stories about her travels or her collection of weird art, or her opinions on why the entire family except me was dumber than a box of rocks with less personality. She'd died 6 months earlier, and I'd gone to the funeral, stood there in my one good suit, the same suit from my wedding, still loyal and hanging in there unlike some people I could mention, and felt genuinely sad because Aunt Maggie had been one of the few family members who didn't look at my life choices like I was a case study in poor decision making. I'm sorry, what about Aunt Maggie's estate? I asked, because my brain was still operating in survival mode and couldn't quite process why a lawyer was calling me about anything. I figured maybe there was some final expense I needed to chip in for, some last bill that needed splitting among the relatives, which would be just perfect because what my financial situation really needed was another expense I couldn't afford. James Holloway cleared his throat in that way lawyers do when they're about to say something important and want to make sure you're paying attention. Mr. Greenham, I'm the executor of your aunt's estate. I've been trying to reach you for several weeks, but the contact information we had on file was outdated. Your aunt left specific instructions in her will regarding you. My heart started doing this weird thing where it couldn't decide whether to speed up or stop completely. Instructions? What kind of instructions? I was thinking maybe she'd left me something sentimental, like her collection of weird paintings, or maybe that ugly vase she always claimed was worth something, but probably wasn't. Something I could appreciate emotionally, even if it didn't help with the three jobs and the mounting exhaustion and the wife who looked at me like I was a participation trophy she'd outgrown. Mr. Green, Holloway said, and I could practically hear him smiling through the phone. Probably because he got to deliver good news for once, instead of the usual lawyer stuff about lawsuits and divorces and people screwing each other over. Your aunt has left you the bulk of her estate. After taxes and various small bequests to charities, you're inheriting approximately $8 million. dollars. I want you to understand something about this moment. I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I didn't drop the phone in some dramatic fashion that would have made for great television. What I did was stand there in that disgusting back room at Freshburger, surrounded by industrial mayonnaise containers and the lingering smell of failure, and I laughed. I laughed so hard that my manager Rick stuck his head in and asked if I was having a mental breakdown, which was a fair question given the circumstance. I'm sorry, and I said when I could finally breathe again. Did you just say $8 million, dollars, as in 8 followed by 6 zeros, as in the amount of money that people who don't work 3 jobs have? I was half convinced this was some elaborate prank, that Marcus had hired an actor to mess with me. Because there was no way, absolutely no way, that I, Thomas Green, the guy who calculated whether he could afford name brand cereal or had to go generic, was suddenly a millionaire 8 times over. But Holloway was patient, probably used to people having minor breakdowns when they realized they'd won the lottery without buying a ticket. Yes, Mr. Green, $8 million. dollars. Your aunt was quite specific in her will. She wrote, and I quote, Thomas is the only Green with a brain and a heart, and the rest of them are vultures waiting for me to die so they can fight over my money like pigeons over a French fry. Give it all to Thomas. He'll actually do something worthwhile with it instead of buying a third yacht they don't need. Holloway chuckled. Your aunt had quite the way with words. That was Aunt Maggie, all right. She'd always called me the good one, the only family member who visited her because I actually liked her company and not because I was angling for inheritance. Turns out, not being a greedy vulture pays off sometimes. Who knew? I'd visited her in that massive house of hers whenever I could squeeze it into my impossible schedule, usually on my way between jobs. And we'd sit in her garden while she'd tell me stories about her life and ask about mine. She'd always look sad when I'd talk about working 3 jobs, none about sacrificing everything for Clarissa's dream. That girl better be worth it, she'd say, and I'd assure her that Clarissa was, that we were building something together, that it would all pay off. Aunt Maggie would nod, but her expression always said she knew something I didn't. Turns out she knew a lot of things I didn't, including the fact that she was sitting on $8 million dollars and planning to give it all to me. There are some papers you'll need to sign, Holloway continued, snapping me back to reality, or whatever passes for reality when you're suddenly rich while wearing a uniform that smells like onion rings. Can you come by my office this week? We'll go through everything, set up accounts, discuss investment strategies if you'd like. This is a significant amount of money, Mr. Green. You'll want to be smart about it. Smart about it? Right, because I'd been so smart about everything else in my life. But even in my shock, even as my brain was trying to process the concept of $8 million, dollars, enough money to quit all 3 jobs, enough money to never smell like French fries again, enough money to tell every bill collector to go to hell and mean it, a thought crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. I wasn't going to tell Clarissa. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I was going to keep this secret like my life depended on it, because suddenly I had the opportunity to answer a question that had been gnawing at me for months, maybe years. Did Clarissa love me, or did she just love what I could do for her? Did she see me as a partner, or just as the financial backing for her dream? When she looked at me, on the rare occasions she bothered to look at me anymore, did she see Thomas, the man she married? Or did she see Thomas, the convenient ATM who worked 3 jobs and never complained? I'll be there, I told Holloway, my voice steadier than I felt. And Mr. Holloway, this stays between us. Complete confidentiality. I don't want anyone knowing about this. Not family, not friends, nobody. Can you do that? There was a pause, and I could imagine him raising an eyebrow in that lawyer way, probably wondering why someone who just inherited $8 million wanted to keep it secret instead of shouting it from the rooftops. But lawyers are good at discretion. It's literally their job. So he just said, "Of course, Mr. Green, attorney-client privilege. Your inheritance is completely confidential unless you choose to disclose it." I hung up and stood there for a long moment, staring at my reflection in the stainless steel of the industrial freezer. The same Thomas Green looked back at me. Tired eyes, greasy uniform, the posture of someone whose back hurt constantly. But everything had changed. I was rich. I was actually, legitimately, checked the bank account multiple times to make sure it's real rich. I could quit every job. I could sleep for a week straight. I could buy things without checking price tags first, like some kind of functioning adult instead of a financially traumatized hamster on a wheel. But instead of relief, what I felt was curiosity. A dark, slightly vindictive curiosity about what would happen when Clarissa graduated, when she got her law degree and started her career, when she didn't need my 3 jobs and my exhaustion and my sacrifice anymore. Would she stay? Would she suddenly remember she loved me? Or would she do what I suspected she'd been planning all along and trade up for someone who fit better into her new world of legal briefs and networking events and expensive lunches? I decided right then, standing in that gross back room at Freshburger, that I was going to find out. I was going to keep working these jobs, keep playing the role of struggling husband, keep being the financial supporter she took for granted, and I was going to watch what happened when she thought she'd outgrown me. Because if she loved me, really loved me, not just loved what I provided, then the money didn't matter. And if she didn't love me, if I was just the stepping stone she'd needed to reach her goals, well, then at least I'd know the truth before I wasted any more of my life on someone who saw me as temporary. I walked back out to the register, apologized to the customer whose burger was apparently still looking at her funny, and made her a new one, with a smile that probably looked slightly unhinged because I was suddenly a secret millionaire working at Freshburger, and the irony was almost too much to handle. Aunt Maggie would have loved this. She always did appreciate a good plot twist. The thing about having $8 million that nobody knows about is that it turns you into a world-class actor, and let me tell you, I deserved an Oscar for the performance I put on over the next 2 months. Every morning I'd wake up, still in that cramped apartment with the leaky faucet, and the neighbors who seemed to have a passionate hobby of moving furniture at 2 in the morning, and I'd go through the motions of being broke, Thomas, struggling Thomas, 3 jobs. Thomas, who couldn't afford to dream beyond his next paycheck. Meanwhile, my bank account was sitting there like a secret superpower I'd decided not to use yet, just quietly accumulating interest while I played the role of my life. I kept showing up to all 3 jobs because quitting would have raised questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Hey, why'd you suddenly quit?" "Oh, inherited $8 million from my eccentric aunt, just keeping it secret to see if my wife actually loves me or just loves my willingness to work myself into an early grave." Normal stuff. Yeah, that would have gone over well. So I kept loading crates at dawn, kept flipping burgers by day, kept watching empty hallways by night. And the whole time I was planning something that probably made me either incredibly romantic or completely insane. Jury's still out on which. I decided I was going to buy Clarissa a law firm. Not just any law firm, but a legitimate, fully operational, ready to go legal practice that she could walk into on graduation day and start building her empire. I'd name it Green and Associates, set it up with everything she'd need: computers, legal databases, office furniture that didn't look like it came from a garage sale, even a couple of experienced paralegals to help her get started. It would be her dream, handed to her on a silver platter, the ultimate validation of all those years of law school and all my years of sacrifice. My fantasy played out like a movie in my head. I'd surprise her on graduation night, hand her the keys, literal and metaphorical, to her own firm, and she'd cry those beautiful tears I remembered from our early years, throw her arms around me and say something like, "You're my forever," or "I can't believe you did this," or literally anything that indicated she saw me as more than just the help. Looking back now, I can see how delusional this was, but at the time it made perfect sense. I'd spent weeks researching law firms and talking to commercial real estate agents about office spaces, consulting with Holloway, who thought my plan was either brilliantly romantic or evidence that I needed therapy, possibly both, about what a new attorney would need to start a practice. I found this perfect office space downtown, not too flashy, but prestigious enough to impress clients, with big windows that let in natural light and made you feel like you were somewhere important. The building had that new money smell, the kind of place where people wore suits that cost more than cars and discussed things in hushed, serious tones that suggested they were either changing the world or billing someone $500 an hour to pretend they were. I furnished the whole place myself, or rather, I hired people to furnish it while I supervised between shifts at Freshburger, which created some hilarious moments when interior designers would call me about fabric swatches and color schemes while I was elbow deep in burger assembly. I'm thinking the charcoal gray for the reception area gives a more sophisticated impression than the slate blue, they'd say. And I'd be like, sure, whatever looks more like justice. Because what did I know about interior design except that our apartment couch was held together by hope and a strategically placed blanket? The technology setup alone cost more than I'd made in 6 months at all three jobs combined. But I didn't care because this was supposed to be the grand gesture, the proof that all those years of struggle meant something, that we'd been building toward this moment together, even if only one of us knew it was coming. Top of the line computers, subscription to every legal database Clarissa had ever mentioned needing, a case management system that supposedly made running a practice as easy as ordering pizza online, though I suspected that was marketing exaggeration because nothing involving lawyers could possibly be that simple. I even hired 2 associates, recent law school graduates themselves who were thrilled to have jobs lined up at a firm that paid competitively and didn't require them to sell their souls to corporate law. Jennifer and Marcus, not my Marcus, a different Marcus, because apparently that name is legally required in every workplace, were sharp, ambitious, and exactly the kind of colleagues Clarissa would need. I interviewed them myself, sitting in my Freshburger uniform because I'd come straight from a shift, and if they thought it was weird that the owner of a law firm smelled like French fries and looked like he hadn't slept in a week, they were professional enough not to mention it. This is quite an operation you're setting up, Mr. Green, Jennifer had said during her interview, looking around the office with obvious appreciation. Your wife is very lucky. And I'd smiled, thinking, yes, yes, she is. And soon she'll know it, and everything will finally make sense. The struggle will have been worth it. She'll see that I'm not just the guy who paid her tuition. I'm the guy who believed in her enough to literally build her future with my own hands, or at least with money from my dead aunt, which is basically the same thing. I spent hours planning the reveal, workshopping different versions in my head like I was writing a screenplay. Should I bring her to the office blindfolded? Too dramatic. Should I just hand her a key and an address? Not dramatic enough. Should I plan it for after the graduation ceremony or wait until we were alone? Every detail felt crucial because this wasn't just about giving her a law firm. This was about proving that our marriage still meant something, that still meant something, that 7 years of sacrifice wasn't just me being a convenient stepping stone, but rather me being a partner, investing in our shared future. The firm was ready 3 weeks before graduation. 3 weeks of walking past that office, seeing the gold-plated sign that read Green and Associates, and feeling this bizarre mixture of pride and terror. Pride because I'd actually done it. I'd created something real and professional and impressive out of nothing but inheritance money and determination to prove my worth to someone who'd stop seeing it. Terror because what if it wasn't enough? What if I handed her this incredible gift and she looked at me with those cold eyes she'd developed in law school and said something like, "This is nice, but I've already accepted a position at Holloway's firm." Or worse, "This doesn't change anything between us, Thomas." But I pushed those thoughts away because I was committed to the fantasy now. I'd watch her study in our apartment, her barely acknowledging my presence, me pretending to be tired from work when really I was just tired from keeping this massive secret. And I'd think about graduation night. I'd think about her face when she realized what I'd done. I'd imagine her remembering why she married me in the first place, remembering that I wasn't just some guy who worked 3 jobs, but rather someone who'd literally move mountains, or at least buy law firms, to make her happy. Marcus, my Marcus, the cynical, coffee-drinking prophet of doom, noticed something was different about me. We met up one evening at our usual depressing diner, and he looked at me across his cup of cheap coffee with those knowing eyes that saw through basically everything. "You're planning something," he said flatly. "You've got that look like you're about to do something either really romantic or really stupid, and history suggests it's probably both." I wanted to tell him. God, I wanted to tell someone about the money, about the firm, about the grand gesture I'd been orchestrating like some kind of romantic Ocean's 11 heist, except instead of stealing something, I was giving something away. But I couldn't risk it. Couldn't risk word getting back to Clarissa before the big reveal. I'm just looking forward to her graduation, I said, which was technically true, even if it was leaving out about $8 million worth of context. Things are going to change after she graduates. Marcus raised an eyebrow, stirring his coffee with the intensity of someone trying to read tea leaves or possibly just staying awake through another graveyard shift at whatever job he was working that week. Change how? He asked, and I could hear the skepticism in his voice, the unspoken concern that I was setting myself up for disappointment on a spectacular scale. Just trust me, I said, smiling like an idiot who'd confused hope with certainty. After graduation, everything's going to be different. Better, you'll see. And Marcus looked at me with this expression that was half sympathy, half concern, like he was watching someone confidently walk toward a cliff while insisting they knew what they were doing. All right, man, he said finally. I hope you're right. I really do. Reality check from future Thomas. I was not right. I was, in fact, spectacularly wrong in ways that would have been funny if they weren't happening to me. But present Thomas, the Thomas who was still planning his grand romantic gesture and believing in fairy tale endings, didn't know that yet. Present Thomas was convinced that love could be proven with grand gestures and expensive gifts, that sacrifice and dedication would eventually be recognized and rewarded, that the woman who'd stopped saying, I love you, would suddenly remember she did once I showed her how much I'd been willing to give. I had the keys to Green and Associates in my pocket during her final exams, during the week before graduation, during every moment when she was stressed and distant and treating me like I was somewhere between furniture and a mild inconvenience. Those keys felt like power, like proof, like the answer to every doubt that had been creeping into my mind over the past year. Soon, I'd think. Soon she'll see. Soon everything will make sense. Spoiler alert, because we both know where this is going. Nothing made sense. Nothing went according to plan. And those keys I'd been carrying around like a talisman, they were about to become the most expensive lesson I'd ever learn about the difference between what people say they want and what they actually want. But graduation night was still coming, and I was still stupid enough to hope that my grand gesture would be enough to save a marriage that was already dead. I just hadn't admitted it to the morgue yet. Graduation day arrived with all the ceremony and pomp you'd expect from a law school that charged enough tuition to fund a small country's infrastructure. I sat in the audience wearing my one good suit. Yes, still the same wedding suit, still hanging in there like the loyal fabric champion it was, and watched Clarissa walk across that stage to receive her diploma. She looked absolutely stunning in her cap and gown, professional and polished, and completely transformed from the woman I'd married 7 years ago. The audience clapped, parents cried, students cheered, and I sat there with the keys to Green and Associates burning a hole in my jacket pocket, thinking this was it. This was the moment everything had been building toward, the culmination of 7 years of sacrifice and 2 months of secret planning. After the ceremony, there were the usual photo opportunities and congratulations sessions where families swarmed their newly minted lawyers with flowers and pride and promises of celebratory dinners. Clarissa's parents were there. They'd flown in from Ohio, and they greeted me with the kind of polite distance they'd perfected over the years. The, thank you for supporting our daughter, but we really hoped she'd married someone with better prospects. Energy practically radiating off them. Her mother hugged her and cried and said something about how proud they were. And her father shook my hand with all the enthusiasm of someone completing a mandatory corporate training module. Thomas, he said. And that was it, just my name. Like, even acknowledging my existence was exhausting. But I didn't care because tonight was the night. Tonight, I'd planned the perfect dinner at this rooftop restaurant called Azure. The kind of place where the napkins looked smarter than most people, where the menu was basically a novella written in French with occasional English translations, where the waiters moved with the grace of ballet dancers, and probably earned more in tips than I made in a week at Freshburger. I'd made the reservation weeks ago, back when I still believed that grand gestures in romantic settings could fix everything. The restaurant had these floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, string lights creating this ambient glow that looked like something out of a movie. Tables spaced far enough apart that you could have a private conversation without the couple next to you hearing about your impending divorce. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't know about the divorce part yet. Present Thomas was still optimistic, still clutching those keys and thinking he was about to save his marriage with real estate and good intentions. We arrived at Azure around 7. Clarissa had wanted to freshen up first, which apparently meant changing into this black dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget and made her look like she was attending a funeral rather than a celebration. Should have been my first clue, but I was too busy being nervous about my big reveal to notice the symbolism. She looked beautiful but cold, like an ice sculpture of the woman I'd married. Technically the same shape, but fundamentally different in composition. The waiter seated us at a table by the windows, handed us menus that might as well have been written in ancient Sanskrit for all I cared, because I wasn't there for the food. I was there for the moment. I'd rehearsed my speech approximately 500 times in my head, had the keys positioned perfectly in my pocket for easy access. Had even practiced the exact angle I'd slide the folder across the table. The folder containing all the information about Green and Associates, complete with photos of the office and a breakdown of everything I'd set up for her. You look nice, I said, because that seemed like a safe opening, a normal thing a husband would say to his wife at a fancy dinner celebrating her biggest achievement. She glanced up from her menu with this expression that suggested I'd said something mildly confusing, like I'd spoken in Klingon, or asked her opinion on quantum physics. Thank you, she replied, the words automatic and empty, the kind of thank you give to strangers who hold doors open. I ordered wine, expensive wine, because tonight was special and also because I'd recently discovered that having $8 million made concerns about wine prices seem adorably quaint. The waiter poured with unnecessary ceremony, probably sensing that he was witnessing something important, though he definitely didn't guess what was coming, because nobody could have predicted the spectacular disaster this evening was about to become. Congratulations, I said, raising my glass, my heart pounding because this was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, planning for, sacrificing for. You did it. You're a lawyer now. I'm so proud of you, Clarissa. So proud of everything you've accomplished. And I meant it. Despite everything, the distance, the coldness, the way she'd been treating me like an inconvenient roommate, I was genuinely proud of what she'd achieved. She'd worked hard, studied relentlessly, and earned that degree. But before I could continue, before I could launch into my prepared speech and reveal the keys and watch her face transform with surprise and joy and renewed love, she set down her wineglass with this deliberate precision that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Thomas, she said, and her voice had that lawyer tone now, that measured cadence that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation as many times as I'd rehearsed mine. We need to talk. Famous last words. Right up there with, it's not you, it's me. And I think we should see other people, in the pantheon of phrases that mean your life is about to implode. But I was still in denial mode, still clutching my fantasy like a life raft in a tsunami. Sure, I said, smiling like an idiot. But first, I have something for you, a graduation gift. Something I've been planning. Thomas. She cut me off with the efficiency of a surgeon making an incision. I can't be with someone like you anymore. The restaurant didn't stop. The string lights kept glowing. The other diners kept eating their overpriced French cuisine. The waiter kept gliding between tables like nothing had happened. But my entire world just screeched to a halt so abrupt I'm surprised I didn't get whiplash. Someone like me? I repeated because surely I'd misheard. Surely she hadn't just said what I thought she said after 7 years of marriage and sacrifice and working myself into the ground for her dreams. She had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable, but only slightly, like she'd prepared for this moment and was now executing her plan with lawyerly precision. You're a good person, Thomas. You've been supportive, but we're in different places now. I'm starting my career and I need someone who understands my world, someone who operates at my level professionally and intellectually. She paused, probably waiting for me to cry or beg or make a scene that would validate whatever narrative she'd constructed about why leaving me was actually the reasonable, mature decision. But I didn't cry, I didn't beg. Instead, I laughed, this short, bitter laugh that surprised both of us. Someone like me, I repeated again, tasting the words, feeling the keys in my pocket that suddenly felt less like a gift and more like evidence of my own stupidity. You mean the idiot who paid your tuition? The moron who worked 3 jobs so you could focus on law school without worrying about money? That's someone like me? Now she looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting in her seat like she'd been hoping to avoid the specifics and just fast forward to the part where we were cordially divorced. I'm grateful for what you did, she started. But I cut her off because I was done and so completely done with this performance. Don't, I said quietly. Don't you dare sit there in that expensive dress at this expensive restaurant And tell me you're grateful while you're dumping me on the night of your graduation. The graduation I made possible. Just don't. She recovered quickly, though, I'll give her that. Years of law school debate training kicked in, and she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and went full attorney mode. I've met someone, she said, delivering the killing blow with clinical efficiency. Someone who understands my world. We connect on an intellectual level. He's an attorney. Let me guess, I interrupted, because the universe has a twisted sense of humor, and I was suddenly certain I knew where this was going. James Holloway? Her eyes widened slightly, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her all evening. How did you— Lucky guess, I said, which was true in the most ironic way possible. The same James Holloway who'd called me about my inheritance, who'd helped me set up Green& and Associates, who'd made comments about my generous gift for my wife, without mentioning that he was apparently planning to become the person enjoying said generosity. The same James Holloway who I'd been planning to hire as a consultant for Clarissa's new firm. Life really does have a sense of humor, dark, twisted, and absolutely merciless, but humor nonetheless. She'd launched into what was probably a prepared speech about how these things happen and we grew apart, and various other platitudes people use when they're trying to make betrayal sound like an inevitable consequence of personal growth rather than a choice they made. But I stopped listening. I was too busy watching 7 years of my life dissolve like sugar in water, too busy feeling the weight of those keys in my pocket, and realizing that I'd built a beautiful gift for someone who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone she was relieved to step off of. I should have told you sooner, she was saying when I tuned back in, but I didn't want to disrupt your graduation semester, or something equally ridiculous, because apparently she thought the timing of her betrayal was the problem rather than the betrayal itself. I stood up, my chair scraping against the expensive flooring with a sound that was probably worth more than anything in our apartment. Enjoy your dinner, I said calmly, pulling out my wallet and throwing down enough cash to cover whatever she ordered, plus a generous tip, because the waiter didn't deserve to be stiffed just because my marriage was imploding. Enjoy your new relationship. Enjoy your career. Enjoy everything you've earned. The sarcasm in that last word was thick enough to cut with a knife, but she either didn't notice or didn't care. She just sat there, looking relieved that I wasn't making more of a scene, probably already mentally composing the story she'd tell her friends about how mature and amicable our separation was, how we'd simply grown apart, how sometimes people just aren't compatible in the long run. I walked out of that restaurant with my wedding suit on, my pride in tatters, and the keys to a law firm I'd bought for a woman who'd just traded me in for an upgrade. The city lights blurred slightly as I stood on the street trying to figure out what the hell just happened, trying to reconcile the evening I'd planned with the evening I'd gotten, trying to understand how I'd been so completely, spectacularly wrong about everything. My phone buzzed, a text from Marcus. How'd it go? She loved the surprise. I looked at that message for a long moment, then typed back, yeah, she was really surprised. Talk tomorrow. 'Cause what else could I say? That I'd just discovered my marriage was over before I could even present the grand gesture that was supposed to save it? That I was standing outside a fancy restaurant with $8 million in the bank and somehow feeling more broke than I'd ever felt working 3 jobs? Life has a sense of humor, all right. A really, really dark sense of humor. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was crying into my pillow or having some kind of emotional breakdown, though both would have been perfectly reasonable responses to watching 7 years of marriage spontaneously combust over wine that cost more than my daily wage. No, I didn't sleep because somewhere between leaving that restaurant and arriving back at our shoebox apartment, something fundamental shifted inside me. The Thomas who'd walked into Azure, hoping to save his marriage with a grand gesture, died somewhere on that rooftop, and the Thomas who walked out was someone entirely different. Someone who was done being a doormat, done sacrificing for people who saw sacrifice as weakness, done playing the role of the struggling husband while sitting on a fortune that could change everything. I spent that entire night sitting on our couch, the one held together by hope and a strategically placed blanket, staring at the keys to Green& Associates and having what I can only describe as a spiritual awakening sponsored by rage and clarity in equal measure. Clarissa never came home that night, probably went straight to Holloway's place to celebrate her freedom or whatever people do when they've successfully dumped the person who bankrolled their dreams. I should have been devastated. I should have been calling Marcus and crying about betrayal and lost love and all that heartbreak nonsense. Instead, I was planning. By the time the sun came up, that weak, apologetic sunrise that makes everything look gray and unfinished, I had made a series of decisions that would have probably concerned a therapist, but felt absolutely right to me. First decision: Clarissa was never going to know about the $8 million. Not now, not ever. She'd made her choice based on who she thought I was, and she was going to live with that choice while I became someone completely different. Second decision: Green and Associates was staying mine. Every last square foot of it, every computer, every legal database subscription, every piece of furniture I had carefully selected thinking about her needs. She didn't want someone like me? Fine. She could watch someone like me build an empire. I called Holloway at 7 in the morning, probably waking him up, but not particularly caring because he was apparently sleeping with my wife now, so pleasantries seemed unnecessary. James, I said when he answered with a groggy hello that suggested I'd interrupted something I really didn't want to think about. This is Thomas Green. We need to talk about Green and Associates. There was a pause, then a throat clearing that sounded guilty as hell. Thomas, listen, I can explain. I don't need explanations when I cut him off because I really didn't want to hear whatever justification he'd prepared for pursuing a married woman. I need legal advice. The firm stays under my name, right? Everything we set up, it's all mine? Another pause, longer this time. Probably him realizing that this conversation wasn't going the direction he'd expected. Yes, everything is in your name. The business, the assets, all of it. But Thomas, about Clarissa, make sure it stays that way, I said flatly. Airtight. I don't want any possibility of anyone claiming community property or whatever legal loopholes exist for people who think they're entitled to things they didn't build. Can you do that? Or do I need to find another attorney? The irony of asking my wife's new boyfriend to protect my assets from my wife wasn't lost on me. But life is full of beautiful ironies when you're having a mental breakdown powered by inheritance money. I can do that, Holloway said quietly, and I could hear something in his voice. Respect, maybe. Or possibly fear that I was about to sue him for alienation of affection, or whatever you call it when someone steals your spouse. Thomas, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. The way things happened. Save it for your closing arguments, I interrupted, because I genuinely didn't care about his remorse or lack thereof. Just make sure my firm is protected. I'll be by your office this afternoon to sign whatever needs signing. And James, this is the last time we talk about anything that isn't strictly business. We clear? Crystal clear, he said, and I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Oh, powerful. Not the fake power that comes from working yourself to death and calling it noble, but real power, the kind that comes from having options and choosing to exercise them with extreme prejudice. Next call was to my manager at Freshburger. Rick, this is Thomas. I quit. No 2 weeks notice, no apologetic explanation about pursuing other opportunities, just done. Then I called the warehouse and quit that job too, and finally the security company. Each conversation shorter than the last because I was discovering that quitting jobs you hate is actually incredibly satisfying when you're not worried about where your next meal is coming from. Marcus called around noon, probably having heard through whatever mysterious communication network exists between people who work terrible jobs that I'd suddenly quit all three of mine. Dude, what the hell? Did you win the lottery? Rob a bank? Join a cult? His voice was frantic with that special concern that comes from watching your friend apparently lose their mind in spectacular fashion. Something like that, I said. And then I told him everything. The inheritance, the secret firm, the disastrous dinner, all of it spilling out in this cathartic confession that probably should have happened weeks ago. There was silence on the other end of the line. The kind of profound silence that suggests someone's brain is rebooting from information overload. Let me get this straight, Marcus finally said, his voice carefully controlled like he was talking to someone on a ledge. You've been secretly rich for 2 months. You bought your wife a law firm. She dumped you for another lawyer before you could give it to her. And now you're keeping the firm and planning to what exactly? Build an empire, I said simply. Turn Green and Associates into the most successful firm in the city. Hire the best people, take the best cases, make so much money and gain so much success that Clarissa has to see it every time she opens a newspaper or drives downtown or talks to anyone in the legal community. She wanted someone who understood her world. I'm going to become her world, and she's not going to be invited to live in it. Marcus laughed. That incredulous laugh that sounds like disbelief and admiration mixed together. That's either the most brilliant revenge plan I've ever heard or you're having a psychotic break. Possibly both. I'm here for it either way. That afternoon, I threw myself into transforming Green& and Associates from the gift I'd built for someone else into the empire I was building for myself. I called Jennifer and Marcus, the associates I'd hired, and had an honest conversation about the situation. Plans have changed, I told them. This firm isn't for my wife anymore. It's mine, and I'm going to make it exceptional. You're both still hired if you want to be, but understand that I'm not playing around. We're going to work hard, bill smartly, and build something that matters. You in? They exchanged glances, probably wondering if their new boss was completely unhinged. But ambition won out over sanity. We're in, Jennifer said, and Marcus too. I'd started calling him that to distinguish him from my Marcus. Nodded agreement. Let's build something incredible. I moved out of the apartment that same week, didn't even wait for Clarissa to come back and have the awkward conversation about dividing up our pathetic collection of jointly owned furniture. I just packed my stuff, which fit embarrassingly into 3 boxes and 2 suitcases, and left a note that said, "The apartment is yours. Everything in it is yours. Congratulations on your new life." Then I moved into a actually nice apartment downtown, the kind of place with a doorman and appliances that all worked and neighbors who didn't rearrange furniture at 2 in the morning because they could afford to hire movers like civilized human beings. The next morning, while Clarissa was probably still celebrating her freedom and her new relationship with Holloway, I made one more call to a marketing firm that specialized in legal advertising. I want Green& and Associates to be everywhere, I told them. Billboards, online ads, newspaper features, the works. I want this firm's name to be synonymous with success in this city. Budget is not a concern. Make it happen. And they did. Within a month, you couldn't drive through downtown without seeing a Green& and Associates billboard. Legal journals were writing articles about the mysterious new firm making waves in the legal community. I gave interviews to business magazines, carefully crafting a narrative about being a self-made entrepreneur who'd identified a gap in the legal market and filled it with innovative approaches and client-focused service, all of which was technically true if you ignored the $8 million inheritance that made it possible. I hired aggressively, poaching talented attorneys from bigger firms by offering competitive salaries, better work-life balance, and the opportunity to be part of something new and exciting instead of just another cog in a corporate legal machine. I took cases that other firms considered too risky or not profitable enough, won them through sheer determination and excellent legal work, and built a reputation for being the firm that actually gave a damn about justice instead of just billable hours. The best part? Clarissa had no idea it was me behind it all. She was too busy trying to find a job in a legal market that was apparently more competitive than she'd anticipated, too focused on her new relationship with Holloway, to notice that the mysterious Thomas Green, who owned the rising firm everyone was talking about, was the same Thomas Green she'd dumped for not understanding her world. I know this because Marcus, my Marcus, kept tabs on her through mutual friends who loved gossip more than discretion. She applied to 6 firms this week, he'd report gleefully. All rejected her. Turns out, law school grades only get you so far when you have 0 practical experience and an attitude that suggests you're doing them a favor by considering their offer. Every rejection she received felt like a small victory to me, which probably makes me petty. But I'd earned the right to be petty after 7 years of sacrifice and one spectacularly humiliating dumping. I wasn't actively sabotaging her. I didn't need to. The legal market was doing that just fine on its own, and karma apparently had opinions about people who dumped their spouses on graduation night after those spouses had funded their entire education. Meanwhile, Green& and Associates went from strength to strength. We won cases, we made money, we earned respect, and I became someone that even I barely recognized. Confident, successful, powerful in ways that had nothing to do with how many jobs I could juggle or how much sleep I could survive without. I was building something real, something mine, something that proved I'd always had potential, but nobody had bothered to look past the burger grease and exhaustion to see it. The nobody who'd worked 3 jobs and believed in fairy tales was gone. In his place was a millionaire boss who'd learned the hard way that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living so well that your absence from someone's life becomes their biggest regret. And Clarissa, she was about to realize exactly what she'd traded away when she'd decided I wasn't good enough for her new world. Because her new world was about to become my world, and I was going to be the one controlling admission. 3 months after graduation, the universe decided to start paying attention to poetic justice. And let me tell you, it delivered with the kind of precision that makes you believe in cosmic scorekeeping. Marcus, my Marcus, not the associate, had become my unofficial intelligence officer, feeding me updates about Clarissa's increasingly desperate job search with the enthusiasm of someone narrating a nature documentary about a predator slowly starving. She applied to Henderson and Ross. He'd report over coffee that was no longer cheap because I could afford the good stuff now. They didn't even grant her an interview. Apparently, they Googled her and found out she's dating James Holloway, and there's some bad blood between their firms. Politics, man. She's toxic by association. I'd nod, sipping my overpriced latte that tasted like victory and schadenfreude, and pretend I wasn't absolutely delighted by this information. Because here's the thing about burning bridges. Eventually, you run out of ways to cross the river, and Clarissa was discovering that she'd set fire to more infrastructure than Sherman marching through Georgia. Every firm she approached had some reason not to hire her. Overqualified, underqualified, wrong specialization, bad timing, personality concerns, or my personal favorite, not the right cultural fit, which is corporate speak for we think you're probably awful to work with based on your vibe alone. The really beautiful part? James Holloway, her supposed soulmate who understood her world so much better than I ever could, turned out to be about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. Word on the street, and by street I mean the legal community gossip network that operates faster than fiber optic internet, was that Holloway had started ghosting her about 2 months into their relationship. Turns out, dating a newly minted lawyer with no job prospects and an increasingly desperate energy wasn't as appealing as pursuing one who seemed like she had potential. Who could have predicted that a man who started a relationship with someone else's wife might not be the most honorable character? Shocking development, truly. Marcus had screenshots. I'm not proud to admit I looked at them, but I looked at them. Text messages from Clarissa to Holloway that went unanswered. We need to talk. Are you avoiding me? I thought we had something real. Each message progressively more desperate. Each one met with silence, or those infuriating one-word responses that men deploy when they're trying to end something without actually having the conversation. Busy. Can't. Later. Finally, the coup de grace. I think we want different things. This isn't working for me. Take care. Take care. The universal sign-off for, I'm dumping you via text because I don't respect you enough to do it in person. The same Clarissa who dumped me at a fancy restaurant because she'd found someone who understood her world was now being dumped via text message by the man who was supposed to understand her world. The irony was so thick you could serve it on toast. She's spiraling, Marcus reported one afternoon, his eyes gleaming with the kind of joy that only comes from watching karma work overtime. My source, by which he meant his girlfriend, who worked at a coffee shop near the courthouse and saw everything, says she's been coming in every day, sitting for hours with her laptop, applying to jobs and getting progressively more disheveled. Last week, she was still doing the full makeup and power suit routine. Yesterday, she showed up in jeans and a hoodie. The fall is happening in real time, bro. It's like watching a really sad movie, except it's happening to someone who totally deserves it. I should have felt something, sympathy maybe, or that charitable impulse that makes good people feel bad about other people's suffering, even when that suffering is self-inflicted. But I didn't. I felt nothing except a mild satisfaction that the universe occasionally gets the math right. Clarissa had calculated that trading me for Holloway and a promising legal career was the smart move, the logical upgrade, from the guy who smelled like French fries to the guy who billed $500 an hour. She'd run the numbers, assessed the value proposition, and decided I didn't add up to enough. Now she was discovering that her calculations were off, and the answer she'd arrived at was broke, single, and unemployable. Then came the text that changed everything. Not a text to me, because Clarissa and I hadn't communicated since the night she'd imploded our marriage. This text came from her friend Bella, another recent law school graduate who'd somehow managed to land on her feet despite the brutal job market. Bella, according to Marcus's extensive intelligence network, was the kind of friend who maintained relationships based on utility rather than genuine affection, which meant she was friends with Clarissa when Clarissa seemed successful, but was probably already calculating her exit strategy now that Clarissa's brand was damaged goods. The text, which I know about because Bella apparently showed it to someone who showed it to someone who eventually showed it to Marcus, who showed it to me because we're all basically in middle school when it comes to gossip, said, "Hey girl, just heard about a firm that's hiring. Green and Associates. They're offering double the usual starting salary for top graduates. You should definitely apply. Heard they're expanding like crazy. Could be your break, Green and Associates, my firm. The firm I'd built from inheritance money and spite. The firm that was indeed hiring because we were expanding, because we were successful, because I'd poured everything into making it the kind of place that attracted the best talent. The firm Clarissa had never connected to me because why would she? The last time she'd seen me, I was a three-job loser who didn't understand her world. The idea that I could own a prestigious law firm was probably so far outside her conception of reality that the connection never even occurred to her. Marcus called me the second he heard. Dude, she's going to apply to your firm. Bella told her about the opening. This is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for. What are you going to do? His excitement was palpable, like he'd been waiting for this plot twist since the night of the disastrous dinner. I leaned back in my office chair, expensive leather that supported my back in ways my old couch never did, and looked out the window at the city skyline. What was I going to do? The old Thomas, the one who'd believed in grand gestures and second chances, might have felt conflicted, might have wondered if this was an opportunity for reconciliation, for forgiveness, for demonstrating that he was the bigger person. But old Thomas was dead, buried under 7 years of sacrifice that had been rewarded with betrayal and a fancy restaurant dumping. New Thomas? New Thomas saw an opportunity for something much more satisfying than reconciliation. Let her apply, I told Marcus calmly. Don't interfere. Don't warn her. Let this play out exactly as it's going to play out. You're going to reject her? Marcus asked, already laughing because he could see where this was going. Oh, I'm going to do so much more than reject her, I said. And I could hear the edge in my own voice. That cold calculation that comes from being someone who's learned that sometimes being ruthless is just another word for having standards. I'm going to interview her. I'm going to let her pitch herself to me. Let her explain why she deserves a job at my firm. Let her beg for a chance to work in the world she thought I couldn't understand. And then I'm going to show her exactly how much I understand her world by demonstrating that I own a significant piece of it. Marcus was silent for a moment, probably processing the levels of calculated revenge I was proposing. That's cold, man. Ice cold. I love it. 2 days later, Clarissa's resume landed on my desk. It came through the normal channels. Our online application system, all professional and proper, with a cover letter that probably took her hours to craft. I read it slowly, savoring every carefully chosen word about her passion for justice and her commitment to excellent legal representation and her strong work ethic developed through years of dedicated study. Not one mention of the husband who'd funded that dedicated study. Not one acknowledgement that her passion for justice had been bankrolled by someone else's passion for burger flipping and crate loading and security guarding. Her qualifications were good, excellent grades, law review, internships at respectable firms during her summers. On paper, she was exactly the kind of candidate we'd normally jump at hiring. But life isn't lived on paper, and I knew things about Clarissa's character that didn't show up on resumes. Things like her ability to discard people the moment they stopped being useful. Things like her talent for justifying betrayal as personal growth. Things like her fundamental belief that some people were just worth more than others, and she was definitely in the worth more category. I scheduled her interview for 2 weeks out, which was longer than our usual turnaround, but I wanted her to marinate in anticipation. I wanted her to spend 14 days imagining this job, building it up in her mind as the solution to all her problems, the redemption arc after months of rejection and disappointment. I wanted her desperate and hopeful in equal measure, because that's the state of mind that makes what I was planning to do next absolutely perfect. Jennifer walked into my office the day after I scheduled the interview, looking concerned. Thomas, I saw we have a Clarissa Green interviewing next week. Same last name as you. Is that my ex-wife? I confirmed calmly. Well, soon to be ex-wife, the paperwork is still processing. Her eyes widened. The one you built this firm for? The one who dumped you at graduation? The very same. And you're interviewing her because I smiled, and it probably wasn't a nice smile. Probably had edges sharp enough to cut glass. Because sometimes the best lesson is the one you have to learn while looking directly at what you threw away. She wanted someone who understood her world. I'm going to show her exactly how well I understand it. Well enough to own it, well enough to decide who gets to be part of it, well enough to know that she doesn't qualify. Jennifer studied me for a long moment, probably trying to decide if I was being professionally vindictive or just human. Finally, she nodded. I'll make sure the conference room is booked. And Thomas, for what it's worth, I think she's about to get exactly what she deserves. Oh, I said, still smiling that sharp-edged smile. I'm counting on it. The next 2 weeks passed with agonizing slowness, like the universe was deliberately stretching out time to build suspense for the main event. I prepared for that interview the way generals prepare for decisive battles, thinking through every possible angle, every potential response, every way the conversation could go. I wasn't nervous. Nervous would imply I had something to lose. I was excited, energized by the approaching moment when Clarissa would walk into that conference room and discover that the nobody she dumped had become somebody she desperately needed. Karma wasn't just coming for Clarissa. Karma had arrived, was sitting in an expensive leather chair in a corner office, and it was ready to conduct an interview she'd never forget. The morning of Clarissa's interview, I woke up at 6, not because I had to anymore, but because old habits die hard and also because I was too wired with anticipation to sleep past dawn anyway. I stood in front of my closet, which now contained more than one suit and actually included options that didn't smell faintly of industrial cleaning products. And I selected my outfit with the care of an actor preparing for the performance of his life. Navy blue, Tom Ford suit that cost more than a month's rent at our old apartment. Custom-fitted white shirt that actually fit my shoulders properly instead of that off-the-rack situation I'd been working with for years. Tie in a deep burgundy that said, I'm successful but not trying too hard to prove it. Italian leather shoes that were so comfortable, I'd briefly questioned whether expensive things might actually be worth the money, a revelation that would have broke Thomas's mind completely. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the guy staring back. Gone was the exhausted three-job zombie with the permanent slump in his shoulders and the dark circles that had become a facial feature. In his place stood someone who looked like he belonged in a corner office, someone who commanded respect just by existing in a space, someone who Clarissa was about to not recognize until it was too late. It was the best disguise I'd ever worn. Success. Marcus called at 7:30 because of course he did. Today's the day. How are you feeling? Ready to deliver justice? He was more excited about this than I was, which is saying something because I was vibrating with anticipatory energy like I'd mainlined espresso straight into my veins. Ready, I confirmed, checking my reflection one more time and adjusting my tie even though it didn't need adjusting. She's scheduled for 10. Jennifer's sitting in as the secondary interviewer to make it look legitimate. We're going to follow standard interview protocol right up until the moment I reveal that plot twist. I wish I could be there, Marcus said wistfully. Like hiding in the walls or something, watching this go down. This is better than any movie. This is real-life karma with a budget and a soundtrack. I'll give you a detailed replay later, I promised. Every excruciating detail. I got to the office at 8, which gave me 2 hours to prepare, review her application one more time, and make sure everything was absolutely perfect. Jennifer arrived around 8:30, looking professional and slightly nervous on my behalf. You sure you want to do this? She asked, setting down her coffee and giving me that concerned look that people deploy when they think you might be about to make a decision you'll regret. I've never been more sure of anything, I said honestly. She made her choice. She calculated what I was worth and decided I didn't add up to enough. Now I'm going to show her the actual math. At 9:45, our receptionist called up to let me know that Clarissa had arrived early. Of course she had. Desperate people always arrive early, hoping that punctuality might somehow compensate for whatever deficiencies they're worried about. Send her to the waiting area, I instructed. We'll collect her at exactly 10, not a minute before. I made her wait those 15 minutes because petty is my new brand, and also because I wanted her sitting there, looking around at the office I'd built, seeing the success that was about to be dangled in front of her. and then yanked away. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jennifer and I walked out to the reception area, professional smiles in place, ready to begin the performance. And there she was, Clarissa, sitting in one of our expensive waiting room chairs, wearing what was clearly her best interview outfit but looking somehow diminished, like someone had turned down her brightness setting. She'd lost weight, but not in the healthy way, in the stress way, the not sleeping well way, the life isn't going according to plan way. Her makeup was perfect, her hair was styled professionally, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Desperation wrapped in a thin veneer of confidence. She looked up when we approached, and I watched. I actually watched in slow motion like I was in a movie. As her brain tried to process what she was seeing, her eyes went from Jennifer to me, then back to me again, and I could see the exact moment recognition hit because her face went through about 17 different expressions in 3 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, shock, horror, and finally a kind of frozen panic that suggested her internal operating system had just crashed. Clarissa, I said warmly, extending my hand like we were professional acquaintances instead of estranged spouses whose marriage had imploded in spectacular fashion. Thank you for coming in. I'm Thomas Green, owner of Green and Associates. This is Jennifer Kim, one of our senior associates. Shall we head to the conference room? She took my hand automatically, muscle memory from years of professional training overriding the fact that her brain was clearly screaming. Her hand was cold, trembling slightly, and she opened her mouth, but nothing came out except a sound that might have been the beginning of my name or might have been her soul attempting to evacuate her body. This way, Jennifer said cheerfully, either oblivious to the tension or doing an excellent job of pretending to be. We led Clarissa down the hallway I'd decorated and the office I'd furnished and the building I'd leased, and I could feel her eyes boring into the back of my head, could practically hear her thoughts racing to catch up with this new reality. The conference room was perfect. Large windows overlooking the city, a table that probably cost more than our wedding, leather chairs that whispered success with every creak. I gestured for Clarissa to sit on one side, while Jennifer and I took the other, a physical representation of the power dynamic that had completely inverted since the last time we'd seen each other. So, I said, settling into my chair and opening the folder containing her application with leisurely confidence, Clarissa Green, graduated top 10% of your class at the law school. Impressive. Tell me, what makes you interested in joining Green and Associates? She was staring at me like I'd just performed a magic trick, like I'd somehow transformed from caterpillar to butterfly, except the butterfly was wearing a Tom Ford suit and owned the garden. Thomas? She finally managed, her voice cracking slightly on my name. You own this firm? I leaned back in my chair, the picture of casual authority. I do. Founded it about 6 months ago. We've had tremendous growth, hence why we're hiring. But we were discussing why you're interested in the position. Your application mentioned a passion for justice. I'd love to hear more about that. Jennifer was taking notes, playing her part perfectly, acting like this was a normal interview instead of the most awkward professional encounter in the history of awkward professional encounters. Clarissa's eyes darted between us, probably trying to figure out if Jennifer knew who she was, if this was some elaborate setup, or if the universe had simply decided to play the cruelest joke imaginable. I don't understand, Clarissa said, abandoning any pretense of professional composure. How is this possible? You worked at Freshburger? You didn't have money, I supplied helpfully, resources, the ability to understand your world. I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who'd been underestimated and was enjoying the revelation that they'd been holding aces the entire time. Funny story about that, actually. Turns out I inherited quite a bit of money from my Aunt Maggie. Remember her? The one whose funeral I went to about 8 months ago? She left me $8 million. I watched that number hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes widened, her mouth actually dropped open in a way that would have been comical if it wasn't so satisfying. Eight, 8 million? Give or take, I said casually, like we were discussing the weather instead of the fortune I'd been sitting on while she dumped me for not being successful enough. I used some of it to start this firm. Actually, fun fact, I started building this place about 2 months before your graduation. I was going to surprise you with it, name it Green and Associates, and hand you the keys on graduation night. Romantic, right? I had this whole fantasy about you being moved to tears and telling me I was your forever. All that fairy tale nonsense. Clarissa had gone pale, actually physically pale, like all the blood had decided to evacuate her face and head somewhere more comfortable. You were going to give me this? This firm, this entire firm, was being the operative word, I confirmed, my voice hardening slightly because we were getting to the good part now, the part where she realized exactly what she'd thrown away. But then you had different plans for graduation night, didn't you? Something about meeting someone who understood your world better than I could? She started to speak, probably to apologize or explain or offer some justification for why dumping your husband, who just funded your entire education, was actually the reasonable choice. But I held up a hand. No, let me finish. Because this is my interview to conduct. You sat across from me at that restaurant and told me you couldn't be with someone like me anymore. Someone who worked 3 jobs and didn't operate at your level professionally or intellectually. Someone who just didn't understand your world. I leaned forward now, and my voice dropped to something colder, harder, more honest than any conversation we'd ever had. Here's what you didn't understand, Clarissa. I understood your world perfectly. I understood it well enough to know that success in law requires capital, connections, and credibility. I had the capital, $8 million of it. I was building the connections while yous were too busy with Holloway to notice. And I've spent the last few months establishing the credibility, building this firm into something that's already getting written about in legal journals, attracting top talent, winning cases that bigger firms passed on. Jennifer was watching this exchange with barely concealed fascination, her pen frozen over her notepad because there was no way to professionally document this conversation. Clarissa looked like she might cry, but to her credit, she held it together, probably drawing on every ounce of that lawyerly composure she'd spent 3 years cultivating. Thomas, she started, but I wasn't done. You made a calculated decision that night, I continued. You assessed my value based on what you could see. 3 jobs, exhaustion, a guy who smelled like French fries, and you decided I wasn't worth keeping around for your new chapter. That was your right. You're allowed to make that choice. But now you're sitting here, applying for a job at the firm I built, asking me to give you the opportunity you thought I couldn't provide. So let me ask you this, professionally speaking, why should I hire you? The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to drop. Clarissa swallowed hard, and I could see her trying to shift into interview mode, trying to salvage something from this disaster. I'm a hard worker, she began, her voice shaking slightly. I have excellent research skills, strong writing abilities, and I'm passionate about what? I interrupted. Justice, your career, or just about finding a job because every other firm in this city has turned you down and you're running out of options? It was harsh, brutal even. But I was done being the nice guy who let people walk all over him while he convinced himself it was love. She flinched but rallied. I made mistakes, Thomas. I know that now. The way I treated you, the way things ended, I was wrong. I was focused on my future and I didn't see what was right in front of me. But I can learn, I can be better, I can do whatever you need. Whatever I need, I repeated, and now I allowed myself to smile again, that sharp-edged expression that had become my default. What I needed was a partner who believed in me, who saw potential beyond the surface, who didn't measure my worth by my job titles. What I needed was someone who would have stuck around for the surprise instead of dumping me before dessert arrived. But that's not what you were, Clarissa. You were never that person. You were someone who saw relationships as transactions, and you calculated that I was a bad investment. I closed her file with a definitive snap that echoed in the quiet conference room. You're not qualified for what we're offering here. Clarissa's downfall became the city's favorite gossip faster than a celebrity scandal. Every firm turned her down, and her friends stopped answering calls once they realized that she'd become professional poison. Even Holloway dumped her when her credit cards maxed out and the glamour wore off. Marcus called me laughing. Bro, karma just passed the bar with distinction. Weeks later, Clarissa showed up outside my office, teary-eyed, makeup smudged, designer heels traded for worn flats. She looked like a completely different person from the confident law graduate who'd dumped me. I made a mistake, she said softly, her voice breaking. No, I replied, keeping my tone ice cold. You made a choice. She begged for another chance, reaching for my arm like physical contact might somehow bridge the gap she'd created. I still love you, Thomas. I never stopped. I chuckled, pulling away from her touch. You love the upgrade, not the man. You love what I became, not who I was. She stood there, completely shattered, tears streaming down her face as she realized too late that she'd turned her back on the one person who would have given her everything without conditions or calculations. She left that night the same way I had months ago from that rooftop restaurant, only emptier. No car because she'd sold it to cover rent. No pride because life had systematically stripped that away. No audience to witness her departure because nobody cared anymore. Just silence and the click of her cheap shoes on pavement, a sound completely different from those confident heels she used to wear. Meanwhile, my firm exploded with success like a rocket I'd been building in secret. I became known as the self-made attorney maker, which was hilarious considering I'd inherited the startup capital. But nobody needed to know that detail. My staff respected me because I actually gave a damn about them as people, not just billable hours. Investors lined up outside my office, practically throwing money at expansion opportunities. The cases kept coming. Good cases, important cases, and the kind that actually mattered beyond just making money. I even started dating again, which felt strange after 7 years of marriage, but also liberating in ways I hadn't expected. Her name was Renee, a graphic designer I met at a charity event, who laughed at my terrible jokes and never once asked about my bank account or what I could do for her career. She liked me for me, which was such a foreign concept after Clarissa that it took me weeks to trust it was real. Sometimes, late at night when I couldn't sleep, I'd think about Clarissa, not with hate or even anger anymore. Just mild amusement tinged with relief. She'd burned a bridge and learned too late that I'd built a skyscraper where it once stood. The best revenge wasn't a lawsuit or public humiliation. It was living so well that she couldn't even afford the admission ticket to my new life. She'd wanted someone who understood her world. I became someone who owned it, and she became someone I'd left behind without looking back.